Hello, everyone. Today we're going to discuss the prepared adults in the prepared environment. So we have the guide, or the person Dr. Maria Montessori called the directress, as well as the assistant. Now, Dr. Maria Montessori, during her time, started a revolution in the concept of the teacher. Because up till then, the concept of the teacher was that here is somebody who was going to come in front of the children, stand there, and they were like a blank page, ready to accept all this information and therefore be filled with information by the teacher. And so the teacher was the source of information, and that was the status of the teacher. Now, she started a revolution in this sense that she said the role of the teacher was very different. She said the teacher was going to be a passive educator. What does she mean by passive? She meant an educator who would watch and observe a child during their natural development unfold, and therefore support that development as it unfolded. And that would be the educational platform, and that would be the role of the teacher there. So she would be, or he would be, guiding these potentials during that natural development rather than filling in an empty bucket in that sense. So therefore it was truly a revolution of her concept. And she called the teacher another name. She called the teacher the directress or the director, because they were directing the child's natural potentials. And now we use the term guide. Okay, so now we're going to talk about that, and I'm going to share my screen so we can see this PowerPoint that I have ready for you. So let's start. So here we are, the prepared adults. And like we discussed, this time the prepared adults were adults who had undergone changes on different levels to be able to support this child's natural development in a way that had never been done during that time. So it was a completely new concept. It was a revolution in the idea of a teacher or in the field of education, what she was saying. So she called the children the new children after they went through this process of normalization, and she called the teacher the new teacher too. So here she said, the adult who is in communication with this new child, that is the teacher, has a whole new orientation. He is no longer the powerful adult, but the adult made humble, serving new life. So just like I said, this was a complete turnabout in that concept of a teacher. And you can see how beautiful that picture is of Dr. Maria Montessori. So now that we had this new teacher, how was this new teacher prepared for their role in supporting children? And that's what we're going to discuss. So here, education, from the very onset, Dr. Maria Montessori says, education is an aid to life. It is to respect that human child with their human rights. And education would be the platform on which they would support that. And there were three pillars that was associated in here. One was the child, without which none of it would exist. And then the guide or the prepared adult. And then the prepared environment. So those are the three pillars or the 3 points of that triangle. So now we're going to discuss what Dr. Maria Montessori called the transformed adult. So what did these transformed adults have to go through to be able to help this child become the person they want to be? So this is what she said, that there was preparations on all many different levels. There was the intellectual preparation, there was the technical preparation, there was the physical preparation, and then the spiritual preparation. So these were the different kinds of layers of preparing the adult who wanted to serve the needs of the child. And these were the transformed adults. So for that transformation, the first thing that we are going to discuss now is the intellectual preparation. What has to be present for that? So the person who wants to be the prepared adult in that environment has to have the capacity to know how to support the child. Therefore, a thorough understanding of child development and the principles of Montessori pedagogy. Because principles are what would be the statement of that educational system. So they had to know this. They also had to know the knowledge to control the elements within that environment. So all the different elements that are present there. For example, independence, social development, the prepared environment itself. So they had to have all that knowledge to be able to support that child. And then to be able to facilitate the child's access to the elements. So to be able to say, okay, here is what could lead you to functional independence. How am I going, or how is the guide going to link them together? So what was necessary for that child's self-development? So that intellectual preparation was required. And once that preparation, that intellectual preparation came, once they were understood that psychology, the Montessori pedagogy, the natural development of the child, they had to be able to communicate this. So with this communication, they had to have the knowledge and the information, and then to make it, implement it, to use it to transform themselves as well as to support the child. So this is the intellectual preparation that has to be present. And in that intellectual preparation, there is that aspect of professional development or continuing education where you cannot be thinking what was said in 1950 is still relevant now with neuroscientists and wonderful advancement of technology where you can even take pictures of the brain now. We are getting to know more and more and more about children and their development. For example, how children get affected by weather. Apparently 1 degree centigrade affects 1% of their concentration. So these are things that you are supposed to be informed of, and that is part of the intellectual preparation of a guide. Then once you've done your training, it doesn't just end there. You have to read all her books, Dr. Maria Montessori's books, and all of us are in that situation where we're still reading those books. So you have to read those books, and then you have to have that continuing education or that professional development where you are learning more and more. So this will support that symbiotic relationship you have with that child, and therefore do full justice to that support you offer that child. So that is the intellectual preparation of the guide. And then we come to the technical preparation. Now here, what is the technical aspect of it? Its understanding of human development must be guided as the concept of the new guide or the new educator. So you have to not only take that knowledge that you have of natural child development and the Montessori pedagogy, but you have to create it in such a way as to become the living model of that new guide or the new educator or the passive educator, like she called us. So therefore, it required a technical preparation, because that technical preparation would prepare the adult not only to have this knowledge, but to be able to channel it as a guide, as the new guide, or the new educator, as the passive educator. And then this would be the key to unlock the whole child development, the holistic development of the child, not just the academic or the intellectual development of the child, but the social, the emotional, the functional aspect, all of that, so that you have the emotional, the social, and the intellectual aspect of the child being supported. And this would be the key to help the child to become who he or she is meant to be. So they would also need the tools to implement this. So the tools would be the training that you get, the training that the adult would get to become the guide. So in knowing what materials to present, how to present them, what to do once you've presented them, how to use scientific observation, what do we do to make sure that the child is able to use that new knowledge that they've got and crystallize it, not just have just the presentation. That's just the initial part of it. We want the repetition. We want them to myelinate it, to make it part of that personality. So we want them to really have crystal clear concepts and abstractions being formed. So we have to be able to do all this. So the training part of it helps them with the technical part. So it gives them the idea of how to help the child develop socially, how to help the child develop intellectually, how to help the child's emotional development. And that question of freedom and discipline of children in that classroom context, which is something that adults and children have always got in that relationship, right? It is a quotation in that relationship. It's an equation that always exists. What is freedom? What is discipline? And how much do we give? So to be able to know how do you support children's self-discipline? How you help them to develop that? How is will developed? So this is all part of that preparation. Also, the preparation of being able to create that environment, to be able to create it to support the two main tasks of children at this time. That means the self-construction of children and that adaptation to that community they live in. So how are you going to prepare that prepared environment? It has to be culturally reflective so that the child can adapt. It also has to be human so that the child can self-construct and become a functional, independent person. So these are the things that we have to have in consideration when we do that technical preparation. And this is the tools that we help whoever comes for this training to acquire so that it empowers them to be able to support the child. So one of the main tools that we use is how we teach. We teach by teaching, not by correcting. So we offer presentations and we represent, looking at those points of consciousness or points of interest or the mistakes they've made that need to be tweaked, that need to be refined so that the child can get to a much higher level of knowing that material better, and therefore gaining that information that the child can from that material. So this is another aspect that we have to show them. It's not just we go and correct them, but we rather teach by teaching. And so, though most of the materials do have their own control of error, we have to give children the time and that repetition so that that error is their own. They explore it, they find out, and they rectify it on their own time and pace. And the adult, the prepared adult, wants to set up that prepared environment so that we can set the child up for success, not for failure, right? We want to set them up for success. And then this technical preparation also talks about the classroom management. How are they supposed to manage these children? In some classrooms, they're supposed to have more than 35 children. How do they manage that classroom? And then to make sure that no child is at the end or the receiving end of very aggressive behavior from the guide. Rather, that every child is treated with respect, open acceptance, error friendliness, psychological safety, and that open acceptance to who he or she is. So those lessons of grace and courtesy is something that we have to show them how to implement it and how to use it in any cultural community where you are. So, for example, how to greet a visitor, how do we start a conversation, how to say, could I ask for help, these kind of things. And then that scientific observation. We still have to, though we know that scientific observation does get better with practice, we still have to help the adult in this process of technical preparation on how to cultivate that art of being a scientific observer, how to try and minimize that subjective influences that a person can have when they're observing another human being. So these are the things that we try and help cultivate. And then what is the point of that scientific observation? Besides collecting that data and being self-reflective as an observer, what was the point of that? The purpose of it, to be able to remove those obstacles, to be able to see where the child's interest leads, so that we can help to offer the next lessons so that the child can get to a much better place when it comes to concentration and repetition. So the art of being able to be a scientific observer is also part of that technical preparation. Then cultivating the art of non-intervention. Like I did tell you, this is where Dr. Maria Montessori talked about the new educator. So we are not somebody who wants to impose our will on the children. And therefore, everybody is sort of listening to you because it's an imposition of will rather than their inner discipline being developed. So here we have to know how to help children develop that will, how to help children develop that self-discipline, give them the opportunities and the experiences. So the technical preparation helps them into that art of non-intervention. So the best motto at that time is, when in doubt, stay out. So if you feel there is a conflict going on, or if you feel the child is working with something and you feel you have to step in before he does something else, that's the time when you have to refrain or restrain yourself and really watch. So when in doubt, stay out is a very good motto for anyone. If you think, should I or should I not, that means you should, because that means there is space for that shouldn't. So there we have to respect the child's activity and All of this becomes part of that technical preparation that adults, young adults take to become a Montessori guide or an educator. So that is part of the technical. Now we're going to next discuss the physical preparation. So when we talk about the physical preparation, what do we mean? We have to realize that the guide is a living piece of educational material, developmental material, because the children with their absorbent mind, their human tendencies and sensitive periods look towards this guide as an example in that community they are in. And therefore, they have to see grace and respect and trust being reflected by that guide. So, to be able to do that, the guide has to first of all maintain self-care. So, you have to have a sense of hygiene. You have to have a neat appearance, really dress out of respect for your child. In fact, Dr. Marie Montessori says that the guide should be physically attractive. She doesn't mean physically in that sense of physical attraction, but appealing to children because they are taking care of themselves. They look very presentable and therefore is attractive to the child who looks at every adult with wonder and awe. So therefore, we do make sure that we are physically attractive or appealing to children and that we do maintain self-care. So that physical appearance is an important aspect as we are living models in that community for that. Now, that being said, when it comes to jewelry, the less is better, less is more. Especially if you are going to be presenting a lot of things, then you don't want things that can distract the child's attention because you want the child's attention to be on that material, not on what you have got on your ears, not what you've got painted on your nails or the rings you're wearing, but rather on that material so that the child's attention, which at the beginning is really short, until you give it more experience so that it can get longer and longer, you really want the child's attention to be on that material. So that is a very special moment for you and that child. So therefore, you don't want to do anything to distract it. So having these bright nail polish, having these earrings that make so much noise as soon as you turn, or having overpowering perfume, especially nowadays with so many allergies around, you don't want something like that. You rather want it minimized. Then the movements you have, the movements that are required. First of all, you're required to be able to sit on the floor most of the time because children in the prepared environment not only work on chairs and tables, they work on chowkis, that's those low tables. They also work on floor mats. So you have to be able to physically be able to do that. And when you do that, you are going to do that with grace and with efficiency. So therefore, it should be one that you have to cultivate. And this is the time when you really start thinking of it. Then also to be healthy. So this is another way you also have to improve your own health. Do something that will, like yoga, go to a gym so that you will also maintain your health, so that you are healthy to be able to serve the children in your classroom. So another thing, your meals, like some schools, in some schools, you have lunches together with the children, and it's not hot lunch that the school serves, rather it's a lunch you bring packed. So what about your healthy eating habits? Is it reflected in the food that you're bringing every day to eat with the children? Because that's another way to reflect healthy eating. So we have to remember that prepared adults are a model for these children. So then, to be able to physically perform the responsibilities required to be the dynamic link between the child and the prepared environment. So you have to be able to not only invite the child to do these presentations, but be able to do these presentations in a way that is graceful, but yet doable for the child. So therefore, it has to be with very clear, analyzed hand movements, so that the child has very clear idea of the steps involved. For example, in how to pour from one pitcher to the other, how to carry a tray, how to do spooning, how to do the button frame. So you have to have these analyzed hand movements, and that is part of your physical being too. And it needs repetition so that you get that muscular memory. It has to be built up. So you have to have analyzed hand movements. You have to think of the logical sequence. You have to make sure it's doable so that the children have the interest to be wanting to do it. Otherwise, if the steps are too complicating and your movements are not clear, they don't want to do it. They're not going to pick up that presentation again. So you have to be aware of how your physical exercising, these analyzed hand movements, have such an impact on the child's learning. And that grace and courtesy in all movements. When you move a chair, are you moving your chair like you showed the children? Or is it just with one hand? Or is the other prepared adult, the assistant, also carrying it in one hand and just swinging it about? Or is it with two hands and very respectfully next to your body? So all of these is part of that physical preparation. And then you manifest an attitude of respect and consideration to the children and the adults. So physically, your whole appearance and your bodily gesture is one of respect and consideration. So if you want to speak to your assistant, or the assistant wants to speak to you, we walk over and have a conversation, not shout over at children, right? So, and when we talk to children, we bend down so that we look at them and give them eye contact, and therefore they are able to see us and we are able to see them, and that conversation can take place where one speaks and the other one listens, and the other one speaks and then the other one listens. So it's a two-way conversation. So this attitude of respect and consideration for children as well as adults must be reflected in that physical manifestation, in your bodily gestures, so that that's a form of communication that you have to have. Now, that spiritual preparation. Now, Dr. Maria Montessori talked a lot about that spiritual preparation of the guide. And here, how does the spiritual preparation come about? So the adult has to construct the prepared environment that is tangible, representing human cultural environment necessary for the activity of the child. So that prepared environment has to represent the culture of the world, has to represent human community, and therefore you have to think of humanity. Then when you're preparing it, then you have to, next, the adult has to now think of adjusting herself to that prepared environment and being able to support the needs of that developing child. So that requires another kind of preparation. So that relationship, that symbiotic relationship between the child and the adult in creating and maintaining this relationship within that prepared environment brings a great change in that relationship. And this is what Dr. Maria Montessori says. She says that relationship is symbiotic because the child offers you something. You offer the child this wonderful knowledge and support, but the child gives you something that elevates you into another kind of a person, into a more spiritual person. And when we talk about spiritual, we don't mean a holy, but somebody who's a little different than what you were before when you started, right? Without this relationship with the children. And this is what Dr. Maria Montessori says, that in our training, we cannot give it to our trainees. We cannot give it to those who want to become the teachers. We can give them the technical, we can give them the intellectual, but the spiritual preparation is a gift that comes when you work with children. Just like scientific observation is an art that gets better and better, practicing it with children. So this is the spiritual preparation that she talked about. And she said this transformation was the nucleus for every change that could take place within that environment, because this transformation on the part of the adult would help the child in their natural development. And this is something that was hardly talked about in the traditional education system then. So we also have to reflect the human aspect of that environment, how compassion has to be there, how mindfulness has to be there, how concentration has to be built, and through that, normalization of that personality can happen. So all of that has to be considered in that spiritual preparation of this. And she says the virtues that a prepared adult should possess that'll help this prepared adult, she said, was humility and patience. Humility to be able to see the child in all their wonder and potential, and patience to be able to adapt to their needs and their pace of learning, whatever that could be, right? And every child has a different pace. So humility and patience, she said, were virtues, the most important qualifications for a prepared guide. And she said the vices that we had to get away with were pride, or thinking you were the adult in charge, and then anger, to be upset about how things were not going your way. So pride and anger, she said, were the vices for this. And she always talked about how we had to have a vision of this child who we have not seen, but that vision is there. This wonderful human being that's going to come, this adult human being that's going to come from this young child. And we are the advocate for the rights of the child. And we have to remember that in every relationship we have that concerns that child. For example, with their parents, you have to be the advocate for that child's rights. So that is part of that spiritual preparation. So these are the different preparations and the different layers. Now, what are the responsibilities that the guides have? So we're going to just touch upon some of the responsibilities. So first of all, the guide has to prepare and maintain that prepared environment. So that prepared environment has to be based on human and cultural needs of children. So Once you prepare, you must think of how it is going to support the principles of natural development. For example, independence, language, movement, social development. All of those have to, with the human tendencies in it, have to be involved so that that prepared environment becomes physically attractive. Remember, children are very attracted to things that are beautiful. So are we. When we see something beautiful, we say, oh, wow, isn't that amazing? Is that beautiful? So children are really attracted to something that's physically attractive. And then it has to be inviting them to say, come work with me, come and explore. So these things have to be present, and it has to be on a very sensorial level because the child is a sensory motor learner at this time. So we have to think of all the activities that go on the shelves to create this prepared environment, have to embody these things so that the child can truly optimize all the innate potentials that they have. So suppose you do flower arranging, we're going to make sure everything that the child needs for that flower arranging is there. It's prepared, maintained, prepared, created, maintained in order. For example, the vase, the flowers, the scissors, the cloth, the apron, right? The vessels to put things in. All of that has to be there so that the child can do flower arranging. So this is the physical part of it. But you also have the intangible part of that prepared environment. And for that, you and the assistant are part of creating that intangible prepared environment. So here, what do children feel when they step into that environment? Do they feel that they are accepted, that they are loved, that this is a psychologically safe environment and it's error friendly, that you will not be labeled here? So this is an important aspect for the child, and this is a responsibility of the prepared adults, the guide as well as the assistant, who are really responsible for that intangible atmosphere of that prepared environment. So the materials in that prepared environment have to be clean, they have to be well maintained, and they have to be complete, because we want to offer complete abstractions, complete concepts. So if there is a ping tower with one cube missing, that means there's only 9. Then it's an incomplete abstraction that we're helping to form. So we take that away until the piece becomes complete, and then it is put away, because it's very hard to get rid of an incomplete abstraction. So it's better to give them the complete first than rather go back to erase the incomplete abstraction and bring back the complete. So you also have to make sure that there is interest in that environment. So how do we do that? You have to rotate the materials and renew the materials so that children are interested. For example, if you have the phonetic box, now this is a box to when children learn how to read fast, change the objects in it. Don't let the object stay there for a whole year and sometimes maybe 3 years. So change the object so that they come to exercise this material. They're so excited. So let's see what she's put in here now. Or put different objects also in the mystery bag. Change your classified cards. So we have to be able to do this so that there is interest, because interest is the main key to all that discovery. Then you are also, the guide is also the keeper of that prepared environment, or the person who is in charge of that peace and harmony in that environment, the discipline part of it. So there has to be very consistent, essential limits. So we have freedom with limits which are essential. For example, whatever you take from the shelf, you are responsible to put it away. Whatever you take, when you put it back, has to be put in the way you found it so that the next person can do it with no problem. So these are the kind of limits that we're supposed to have, and it has to be maintained consistently from day one till the child leaves that prepared environment. So it is always enforced by both the guide and the assistant. So both of you have to be on the same page regarding these essential limits, which are few but consistent. And they guide the child, they help the child to orient themselves to the needs of that environment and therefore feel psychologically safe. So you also, when you are the keeper of that prepared environment, you are also responsible for protecting that concentration, which is so precious. Because this concentration leads to the changing of that child's behavior, which has joy of learning, love of work, sociability, compassion, what she called normalization. So that is part of that concentration too. So that keeper, you have to make sure that there is that collective discipline. Your right as an individual is not above the rights of the community. And the guide is the one that maintains that balance and enforces it. Then the guide is also the dynamic link between the child and the prepared environment. The prepared environment is created by the guide. The prepared environment comes alive through what the guide and the assistant do. So the shelves, the materials on the shelf don't jump up. You have to make that material come alive. So therefore, you have to offer presentations that are enticing. That means we always say, when you invite a child for a lesson, it is an invitation. So we say, first thing we do is invite a child. There is no imposition of the will. You invite the child. If the child says no, then there's another time at a right moment. Because Dr. Maria Montessori says, once the child has said no, the child is not going to focus, is not going to give her attention because already her consent has not been given. So therefore, when we give a presentation, we invite the child first, and then you give the presentation. And when you give that presentation is protected by the assistant. No one comes to disturb you. You and the child have that relationship at that time. And the child gains that information from that material, and you offer it as a present, as a gift. And then after the child has that transfer of activity where you offer the material now, after you've done it to the child, then when the time is right, you discreetly move away and leave the child to repeat as many times as they want. And if need be, you come back again, you reappear to show the child how to put it away, if need be. And all this time, that presentation is protected. And everyone should understand that, including the assistant. And this is what is one of the limits that is enforced in that. So that is an aspect of that being that dynamic link. So you make sure you present every material. Now, when you present a material, you don't just present the first initial presentation and then leave. many materials have many layers, many layers. So you have to help to unfold all those layers, all those following exercises, all those games that you can play, so that the child really gets to know the width and the breadth of that material and all the concepts that can be gained from that material is present, right? Then you have to be the scientific observer so that you can see what the child's developmental needs are and then remove those obstacles from that child's development. And sometimes, most times, adults, we can be the obstacle. So we need to know when we have to practice that art of non-intervention. And then this data is collected. This data is not just collected and left to lie, but it is looked at, discussed amongst you and the assistant or the administrator, and then you work on it to see what can you do next. If it's a lesson you have to present, do you have to represent it again because it was not done? The child missed a very important part of that presentation. Or do you have to represent it again because it was not done the way you would have liked it to be done? Or what can you present next now that it's been done so well? Which grace and courtesy lessons that you presented is not being implemented? So scientific observation is a very important aspect in understanding our role and how to support children and being able to do that. Then you also have the professional responsibilities. And these professional responsibilities depend on the school you're going, but most of them have that note of confidentiality where you do not discuss children, and the assistant doesn't discuss children with parents, and only the guide discusses children with the parents, and you discuss it only with the relevant parents. You don't discuss it with the whole community of teachers, nor the community of parents. And then attending those meetings, keeping records, observing the duties that you're meant to observe. So these professional requisites that you are required to do from the school. If you're supposed to have parent-teacher conferences, that's something you're meant to be doing. So these are the professional responsibilities that you are supposed to be doing when you become that guide. And then we mustn't forget how important you are to that community of children and the prepared environment. Therefore, have personal goals. Have goals to enhance yourself, to enjoy life. So do things outside Montessori. Learn to cook, right? Do yoga, do art, anything else, so that your personal goals enrich in their lives as well as yours. Now we've come to the assistant. Now here, this is the other prepared adult. So the assistant is a vital presence in the environment. This person is the prepared person to help the guide in her work in supporting the needs of children. So the assistant has to be a living model of grace and courtesy, because children look at the two adults in the room and emulate them. So first, the assistant has to assist the guide in preparing and maintaining the environment. So this is something both of you can do together. And some schools, before they start even the school year, they give them a week or 2 weeks And that's the time when you can get to know each other. You can even have coffee together, but you get to know the environment. You get to know how to prepare that environment, how to maintain that environment. For example, replenishing things on a daily basis, like polish, flowers, snack, food. So preparing it, how do you prepare it? Go and make sure the sponge is all wet in the morning. As soon as you come in, the chairs also put down. So all of that. And then also creating an inventory so that the guide is aware of what you have to buy next, so the child is not waiting. For example, pencils, colored pencils, art material, paper, other kinds of stationery, food for the snack table, these kind of things, so that this prepared environment can function really well. So it's maintained well, not only just created, but maintained to a very high level where children can optimize their development. Then the assistant has to help the guide maintain the peace and harmony of the class. So here, the guide and the assistant have to sit down and discuss the few freedom with limits, the few essential limits that are going to be existing here and are going to be implemented every day with consistency. What could they be? For example, whatever the child brings has to be put back. Whatever the child takes off is one that the child knows, has knowledge of, and therefore the purpose of that material will be fulfilled and the child will gain that information. So you have to help the guide maintain that peace and harmony. And when the guide is occupied in giving a presentation, the assistant doesn't do a small group at that time. The assistant then has to observe the whole group and protect that lesson, so that the child's presentation can go on with no distraction. And that whenever there is something, a conflict going in, to know when to step in and when to step out and how to address it. So the guide and the assistant should talk about how this is going to be done and base their talk on laying down that foundation. For most places, most classrooms, when there is a question of discipline, the guide will deal with that, and then the assistant brings it to the knowledge or the attention of the guide, and then it is addressed. Then the assistant also helps to supervise these activities. So sometimes there is only one assistant in the room, and when there's two, that's a lot of assistants, because we really try and say the less adults we have, the better it is. So if you have many more, it is better that one of them is sitting at a fixed place and then, taking notes, doing observation, or helping when they come up to ask them. So now the activities at snack time, helping to prepare the snack. When children say we would like to prepare the snack, they can help to show them where it is, to replenish snack that has to be done, where the glasses go after they've been washed. And then at meal times, they can help to supervise meal times. And then most often on the playground, usually most schools do it in such a way that when the guide is inside having her break, the assistant is on the playground with the children. So the assistant has to be able to understand the needs of children. And if you've done the the orientation, the Montessori orientation course, then you are in a much, much clearer position to understand what's happening. Then the assistant also has to help prepare and repair materials with the guidance of the guide. For example, how to make those classified cards. And then how to repair materials like the ribbons on the bow frame or the buttons on the dressing frame. So these kind of things are what the guide and the assistant before the beginning of the school year should meet and then see how they can help each other. And this is a good time when they ask each other, what are your gifts? If you're good in art, maybe this is what you're doing. If you're good in singing, maybe that's what you could be doing. So this is something that you can discuss at that time. Then the assistant can be shown, if she hasn't done the Montessori orientation course, how to observe and record her observations, so that it gives you another new pair of eyes to look at a child and gives you another aspect, perspective, so that you can work together. So this is a very, very helpful thing that assistants can do. And if you can ask your assistant to do that every day for half an hour, observe one particular child, different child every time, then you will be getting a lot of observations coming in. And then when you do your own, so you have something to correlate with each other. Then also to help maintain current classroom records, for example, repetition. I presented these sandpaper letters. Here is my list. I presented this to Sally. Will you see if she's repeating? Oh, she's repeating it. Can you write the date? And then so you're aware of the repetition. So these kind of classroom records, the assistant is a great person to help you with. And it's really nice if you can have a kind of a blank paper where you can even talk to each other and say, can you observe her just now? I just noticed this. So there is this communication between the two of you. And then to support the guide in the functioning of the class. So for example, if the class has to do a fire drill to help them to get ready, if they have to go out to help them to get ready, if you're going to go for a museum trip. So all of these kind of things, the assistant can definitely help the guide in helping it to become an efficient and effective prepared environment. And some schools also have assistants to oversee the arrival and departure of children. So sometimes in the morning, the guide stays in the classroom and then the assistant goes to the car and receives the children. And then any child, it's a traffic that's just moving. And then the guide will greet the child, but the assistant comes there. And then in the morning cycle, the guide usually stays with those who stay on longer for the whole day or the extended day, the older children, and then the assistant says bye-bye to the children and to the parents who come to receive them. So then you offer care to the children who need assistance of a personal nature. For example, some children, sometimes they're wet themselves. So if they need any help, so the assistant can offer her help while the directress is doing, or the guide is doing something in the classroom. So this is another way that the assistant can help. Then you can also help with the preparation of a snack or a meal. For example, in the toddler community, the assistant is a great help here to set up everything while you are doing, set up the community table while you're having a little group of children singing along. So this is something that you can also look into. And then the assistant should have knowledge of first aid, just like you will, and you should have, as well as how to use the EpiPen, and then the responsibilities tied to child abuse. So both you and the guide should be aware of this and how to report cases of child abuse. Then to protect the presentations of the guide. So this is what we discussed that time too. So when the guide gives a presentation, there should be a communication between the guide and the assistant. So when I'm, like you say, okay, when you see me giving a presentation, please make sure you're not having a small group. Make sure you're free so that no child comes and disturbs me. And therefore the guide can do her presentation for this child without any distraction, and it's a protected presentation, while the assistant will look after the needs of the other children in that prepared environment. Then the assistant can help, especially if you've done the Montessori orientation course, to have individual children or small groups, for example, give a 3-period lesson with the classified cards, to do the sound game, to do small sensorial games. So the guide can help you with this. And if you've done the Montessori orientation course, then you would be aware of how to do this. So this is how you can help. Then there's also the professional responsibilities that are included here. So just like the guide has professional responsibilities that can be different from one school to the other, though most of them do have very similar, the assistant too has professional responsibilities. For example, attending meetings, attending workshops, attending events that the school hosts, attending outings that the guide wants the community of children to visit, like a museum. So these professional responsibilities are what you are meant to be doing, which is part of your contract. But the professional development is one that you must continue for your ongoing educational development. So if you're an assistant and you've done the Montessori orientation course and you love children and you've seen the work that they've done at the primary level or whichever level, then you want to be a guide. So this is something that you can do, as well as looking into other kinds of professional development, other kinds of workshops and things like that that you could do to enhance or improve your support to children, as well as to be the living model of appropriate behavior. So you and the guide have to model that appropriate behavior so that children living in that community are aware of how adults work with grace and courtesy. So the next one. So here, the relationship between the guide and the assistant is truly based on one thing: it is trust. To know in our hearts of hearts that the child will transform. Change happens when the conditions are there, right? And then the next thing, the last one, the last slide. The aim of our daily practice is to discover the child and effect his liberation. So here you see a young guide greeting the visitor. Yes? Okay, thank you very much. Let me stop share. So now that is the end of our lecture here. Thank you so much.